Okay, so did we get to hear, right? Who invented the steel tip plow?
John Deere.
Who invented the mechanical reaper? McCormick. Who invented the telegraph?
Alexander Hamilton.
No, not the telephone. Who invented the telegraph? Who invented the sewing machine? How? How? Well, he was working very hard. That joke is a lie. And who invented the cotton gin? Yeah, Eli Whitney. And there are two American systems. What was Henry Clay's American system as a government proposal to have economic growth? What were the three things he wanted? And you get elements of it, but what three things? Tariff is one. What's another? Hop on the bus, and what are the roads and bridges? Yeah, those internal improvements. Today we would say infrastructure in, like, from the 1930s to the 1970s, they would have called them public works. And what is the other American system of industry? Eli Whitney would once again be involved with this. Yeah, interchangeable parts. And interchangeable parts would definitely fit in with this new idea of capitalism. Let's go to get to this. Why America? Why did the United States do this? Did we get to demand? Did we get to any of this at all?
No, we talked about middle class has debt.
We're talking about middle class and what that means. Did I talk about the wealth? Did I talk about this? Okay, so we're good. So there's more demand on the United States. That's a big thing. We have big inequalities of wealth. It hits demand. And that's a big drag on the economy. But the United States had more demand. It gave them an advantage. Next, in the United States, there was a shortage of labor. So people didn't, there was an idea that we need the machines to do the work because there's not enough workers. There's not enough skilled artisans who could do this craft. Unlike France, that was delayed in the Industrial Revolution, and this would really hit like by, let's say, 1870. They'd lose a massive war of Prussia partially because of this. But workers there, they resisted machines a lot more than the United States did at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, because it would, machines take away the jobs and the importance of the skill of skilled craftsmen. Skilled craftsmen are really important if you don't have machines. But then once you set up the system of capitalism where machines become dominant, then that skill is irrelevant. It's lost. So, one more thing this does. If there is a shortage of labor, what does that do to wages? What's that? Shortage of labor, what happens to wages? Raises them a little bit, at least bumps them up a little bit, thus meaning more demand. Not a lot, and you'll see this trend go away in the 1880s, 1890s. Today, even though wages have been stagnant since 1973, wages today are about the same as 1973, which is kind of mind-boggling, because I think there's only one of us in this room that was alive in 1973. Garfield, no. Even Garfield wasn't alive yet. But wages are, there's a bump in wages right now, maybe, and we'll see if that's permanent. We'll see. Next, education. We've already talked about the importance of education. A little bit on training workers, but one thing, an educated workforce, and this is what we have to get, adapts to change faster. If well-educated workforce means that they have been taught to move, to go with change, to expect change, to think change is okay, to trust those who are bringing the change. No, it doesn't always work that way. And do not think because they're educated they're smarter. No, by no means. Education, part of it is just having access to material, going through a process of learning it. But I know people with PhDs who are dumb as rocks. And I know people who don't have high school diplomas are some of the smartest people I know. So for whatever reason, they did not do well in this process of school. You probably know people like that. My guess is you're in here, you probably have done very well in school. But even then, there are people really smart that just for whatever reason don't do all that well. So don't get caught up in the idea, well, they've passed a test someday, so they must be really smart. Out there. All of us in here, very smart, right? We are. No. But don't get caught in that trap. Doesn't mean you're smarter, but you're more likely to adapt to change. And there's something else. Fitting in with education, this concept of universal public education. Now, when I mean universal, the idea of what universal education will change depending on where you're at. And because schools are locally funded, areas in wealthier neighborhoods might have better schools than areas with schools or areas with less wealth. Why? Less money to put into schools. Less money to pay for programs, whatever it might be. But beyond that, this concept that everybody should have some kind of at least base level education. And it's going to be funded by the people of the United States. A pretty remarkable thing. And it's kind of under attack. Sometimes it's not. Now it's kind of under attack. Here's Horace Mann. And he had this concept that if we're going to have public education, it's going to have a twofold job. To make good thinking citizens in a republic, so much like Thomas Jefferson, but also prepare them for the changing world. And this will be a conflict that will be in schools to this very day. What is more important? Making good citizens, thinking citizens in a country, or workers who work for a wage and obey orders? Which is more important? Doesn't it depend where you're at and where you're at that moment? Hey, if I'm a would-be employer, wouldn't I like the state to pay for the education of all my workers so I don't have to worry about it? So then I save money? There's an element of that. So what's more important? Knowledge and thinking or skills? Skills are for workers. Father, what do you have skills if you don't have knowledge to think? It's a tough one, isn't it? We also live in a society where you have now been ingrained where you have to go out and get a job for a wage, correct? You need to survive to get a wage. I mean, it's a really tough dividing line. And so here's one of the early elementary classrooms. I love this with the abacus up here if everyone can see. They can move it here. That's a great painting. Here's one of a small little classroom. Boy, I wish we had chalkboards. Why do I want chalkboards? That'd be the only reason. I've had one class, they had chalkboard when I first got here. The chalk dried your hands off. I mean, it's just awful. Your hand just hurt. And that's why I think teachers would make that sound, because their hands hurt and they're just irritated. Buying that? So public education. Next, speaking of that, this is supposedly a spelling test from a 5th grade classroom, and I thought this was a perfect time to bring this in here. Is this real? The only word they spelled is illiterate. Yes, of course. Of course. I don't buy it, but I still think it's pretty funny. So, number 9, the new economic system is created called capitalism. And even though this is pre-capitalism, Adam Smith would write a book. Now, titles of books back in the 18th century were huge. There are more sentiments in the inquiry into the nature of causes of. What we need to know is the wealth of nations. That's what everybody calls it. This is a book that people quote and they talk about. They talk about the basis of modern business theory, economic theory. Now, most people have never read it, but they always talk about it. It's hard to read them. 18th century prose is really difficult. The wealth of nations, Great story. He's a good writer, but they just have a different style, and there's no grammatical rules yet. So you might get a page, one page in the book, that's one sentence. It's just really weird and awkward because they didn't have the rules of grammar like we think of. And the flow is different. So I've read it, I had to read it for a class, this historiography class or the history of economics. And I didn't like it because you have to read something for a class. It's never as fun. Then when I read it on my own, it's really interesting, but just it's hard to read. I would recommend it if you're interested to it, but remember, it flows so much different than we're used to. But in it, he lays out this idea of what is a market. Now, he took it from two Arab philosophers who took it from Greek philosophers, but the big thing is he combined things together. He's a Scottish philosopher, lived in Edinburgh, and this is the beginning. The word was not used yet, but of something called economics. And economics are what do people do with scarce items? How do they produce them? How do they consume? And that includes getting it to the market. And how do you transfer wealth to deal with these scarce items? When I mean scarce items, we can think of a lot of scarce items, but anything you buy in a market. But let's get to the biggie. Food, heat, clothing, shelter. How do you distribute that? And do you allow certain people to accumulate wealth based on the fact they control scarce items that people need to survive? These are all economics. Economics is not the study of business. It is not a business class. Business is something else. Sure, to be successful in business, maybe you should have some background in economics. But economics are how you might have to deal with one scarce item in a market, like the market that would buy and sell frozen concentrated orange juice, right? I know you're all thinking that, so I said it. Or the market, that's called a microeconomics, one market of one good, or a frisbees, or the macro, or the whole country's market. But it's not business. These guys are just called philosophers. Eventually, this will be known as economics. And I'm interested in economics. I have a minor in economics. My brother is an economist. He's a professor of economics, actually. But, which can be aggravating to talk to. I'll tell you the Truman story about economists down the road. So there's Adam Smith. If you get past the disembodied head of a former student, you see the green poster. That is Adam Smith right there, who is perpetually facing north. People know that to this day. He is facing north. It was written in 1776. Gee, I wonder what else came out in 1776. What documents have we read? Came out in 1776. Declaration of Independence. Kind of a big year. And he lays out this concept of something that we will call a free market. A market is this area of the exchange of goods. So it would make sense that a store would be called a market. Now, once again, the market of one item, like frozen concentrated orange juice, or the whole market. And you notice I put this in quotes, because he's talking about the idealized free market, where anybody can come in and buy and sell at any time. When has this existed in humankind? Never. It's never existed. So there are rules, there are laws, there are people who have knives and guns who steal stuff and take your market away from you. It's really hard to have an idealized free market. It really can't happen. You get close, maybe. I don't know where it's happened, but he's talking about the idealized market. So what are we talking about here? If the buying and selling of goods, what's matter? This concept that people are in competition. Competition to sell goods, competition to buy goods. And self-interest guides everything. Guides production, but also guides sales. People don't produce goods because in a market because they're altruistic. People need food, so I will produce food. No, why do they produce food? personal benefit. In the concept of a modern market, money. But it could also be power. But also, when people buy goods, they don't spend more for an item if they don't have to. I mean, think about when you go to the store and buy something, don't you look for the lowest price? You can also say lowest price with the best quality. Because how do we know something is good? How do you know my frozen concentrated orange juice is better than everybody else's? No, because I put it on the label. You can trust me. Already we get to the problem with the free market. No, you never know really what you're buying. Even if it tastes good, doesn't mean it's actually good. Because cyanide doesn't have much flavor. But I didn't put that on the label. So with that, and the concept is then, we're all in competition and self-interest is guiding everything. I should add, why is self-interest important? If everybody's operating on their own self-interest and making very rational decisions based upon their own self-interest, Smith said in a perfect market, that'll lead to the best outcome. Because we're all thinking the best rational way. Once again, that gets to another problem with the free market. How many people always think rationally? Out there all the time. Yeah, people actually are very irrational. So this is based on the idea that everyone is rational. But still, we're idealized market. So, what do you want? It's a profit margin. If you are selling goods, now buying it has a similar idea, but we're just with selling goods. My frozen concentrated orange juice, it's revenues, the amount of money I get from the sales of it and the cost to produce it. That's a profit margin. So it's that difference. So my revenues here, cost here, the difference, that's my profit. Now, here's the problem. For business, but this will affect and will ripple to wages, to how people make a living, to government policy, you name it. Which one, if you're starting a business, which one do you have control over? Both are really hard to control, but which one at least you have the most control over? Cost. And that includes the entire cost of production, including wages, but also machines come into it, and they're expensive. By the way, cost, I can't emphasize that enough. Everything revolves around cost. Everything. So, how do you make more money? Get the profit margin down. Oh, I should add, before we get to that, if you raise your prices, if I raise my price for frozen concentrated orange juice, what happens to my revenues? Do they go up? No, because if I raise my price, what will competitors do? They will come into the market, lower cost, and I will actually lose money. So how do we increase our profit margin? Adam Smith said a division of labor. If you get people who specialize in a certain good, you become more efficient. Each worker will produce more, and the term for that is productivity. The amount of things you get produced, the amount of production per worker. So if I can get each individual worker to produce 10% more, but pay them the same, doesn't my cost drop and I make more money? Efficiency. His example was making pins, PINs, like for sewing. Think about a pin, just a little pin. Today, because of machines, it's not that big of a deal. You know, all of you probably can deal with your pin needs every day, right? Imagine making a pin from scratch. Imagine. Now imagine having all the skills to make it. From mining the iron and the cadmium and the nickel, knowing how to make steel, which was called puddling because it would kind of gurgle and so. Knowing how to make a mold that would not break when you put molten steel in it. Knowing how to open that mold without breaking it. How to file it without breaking a thin little pin. Imagine knowing all of those skills. Would you be good at any of them? It'd be really hard. But think about division of labor. If you have one person that their only job is to put the mold, pour the steel in the mold, what will they become? Won't they become really good at that one job? Every position, you have one person doing it, they become very good at it. That's what happens to productivity. Goes up. What happens to your cost? Goes down. Do you see where machines come into play? Just imagine if you could replace that worker, which is still variable, and they might get sick. They might have a family. They might need to go to the bathroom. Replace them with a machine. How does this tie in with the American system of industry? The Eli Whitney part. Machines make the individual parts. If you have machines make the individual parts, what do you have? More productivity. This is not how much, so every time you have more machines, your productivity goes up. By the way, then what happens to companies that rely on just workers doing it? Can they compete? They're gone. They're all gone. They can't compete. We'll talk about this more down the road. So what decides the price? What decides production? What decides everything? Supply and demand. So if you take a basic level economics class, that's one thing I always want to push for an economics class, but I think I'm one of the few people who can teach it. I teach enough stuff. But just because we don't have enough people with economics grants. He had a teacher who did a great job with it, but he took another job. He retired and moved on. Supply and demand says it. You'll see that generic curve. Here's the demand curve, supply curve. No, things don't quite look this way. It's generic with the basic level. And it works like this. Here's the demand curve. If the price is really high, people don't buy as much. Does that make sense? If the price is low, people buy more. Just generically. Supply. If the price is low, people won't produce as much. If the price goes up, people produce more. Make sense? So if there's an oversupply of a good, the price drops. Or demand drops for a good, the price drops. Or vice versa. So what sets the price? It's a gray area. There's no set area where this happens, especially in the perfect idealized free market. But there'll be some kind of equilibrium where there'll be enough companies coming to produce enough of a good and set a price where they can make money and survive, and people will buy the product. And it's clearly different. I know we all need frozen concentrated orange juice to survive. But the supply and demand curve for, honestly, like the Frisbees would be a lot different than the supply and demand curve for fresh water. Right? Wouldn't you pay a lot more for fresh water? It changes the nature of the curve. What do we call this? Adam Smith said, all things being equal, we'll let the invisible hand of the market decide that. It will set the price. Quit. And that's Adam Smith. Adam Smith said this. Now, this is still before capitalism. And yes, people knew this. It was instinctual. It just happened. But he laid it out. And this would become the justification for lots of things. The invisible hand. But how does the invisible hand function best? If all things are equal. By the way, that's another example of division of labor making cloth. Laissez-faire. Remember laissez-faire? Or laissez-faire? Hands off by government. Because Adam Smith said government only helps the big, aka monopolies. This is from 1776. First off, what person happened to be president? Did we mention what's big, worried about, or wanted government hands off when it laissez-faire? You remember? It's part of his philosophy. Jefferson. Jefferson read Adam Smith. And this is 1776, he wrote this. Adam Smith is reacting to what is going on around the world. What? British law gave a monopoly to the East India Company 3 years before this book was published, confirming to Smith how government is basically helping the big so they get rich and others get rich. What's the law? Somebody said it. Did someone say the Tea Act? Yeah, the Tea Act. By the way, the Tea Act would lead to what? Rebellious event that arguably led to the revolution? Yeah, and it was all about monopolies. That's what they're talking about. Monopolies. Now, once again, this is pre-capitalism. And Adam Smith is writing in the idealized economy. All things being equal. Are all things equal? No. So that's why you're going to, Adam Smith would add some qualifiers that a lot of people didn't read. So if you get rid of the monopolies, it will lead to competition. That's why Jefferson feared Hamiltonian economics, because he thought, somewhat correctly, that Hamilton wanted to create monopolies. Competition not only ideally would lead to lower prices, but also lead to better quality. My frozen concentrated orange juice, I don't care what goes in it because I'm the only one selling it. All of a sudden, if all of you make your own frozen concentrated orange juice and do things like, hey, you should let it cool or let it heat up and they can drink it easier, right? Directions like that would undermine me, so I must improve my quality. And I've been adding cyanide in it for years to save money. I have no idea how that would save money. Just go with me on that. I would have to take that cyanide out, wouldn't I? Because it's hurting the market. By the way, me saying that and you think, oh, you're being facetious? No. A lot of people believe in the market would say that if you put out a product that kills people, oh, sure, you're going to kill some people, but the market, no one will buy your product anymore, and therefore you'll quit producing and build a better product. Does that happen? Maybe if there's no monopolies. If there's monopolies, yeah. Have you heard of the Ford Pinto? You may know what the Ford Pinto is? Okay, kind of a really ugly compact car they would make in the early 1970s, all the way through the early 80s. And to save money in engineering, they had a little design issue where the gas tank was in the back of the car. And the gas tank's right there, and they put the gas right in there. And as it got rear-ended, it would shift, and the car would explode and burn everyone inside of it alive. It killed hundreds. Hundreds. How long did Ford know about it? Since the beginning. Ooh, this is bad, but we're already making them. How long did they keep that little design law in place? 8 years. They figured, well, we might get sued down the road, but keep going. So there's a flaw in the competition idea. So that. But the whole thing is, we'll let the markets decide good or bad. But what if people don't know? The whole thing about all things being equal is there has to be transparency. You have to know if that car is going to kill you. But they're not going to tell you. There's lots of issues here. That's why this is an idealized market. So, Adam Smith. But this is all pre-capitalism. Wait. This is not supposed to happen this way. Give me 1 second. How did I put this? Maybe I forgot to save it. Give me a sec. There we go. But this is all pre-capitalism. Capitalism was literally just starting in Britain. And Adam Smith could talk about division of labor. There's elements of talk about machines, but he had no idea. No one could have guessed what was coming, arguably. They had elements of it, but they just couldn't imagine what the effect of these machines and how advanced they would become. Because that's his grave. He died before capitalism really began to take hold in Britain or the United States. Yes, I went to Edinburgh and I went to his grave. That was on the same day I had haggis. And I found out, and I kind of knew this, but where we ate, our waitress said, you know, only tourists eat this. And I said, I'm not surprised. What's haggis? Stomach, and what's inside the stomach? sheep stomach or cow stomach, but sheep stomach normally with the intestine and mixed in and spices. It tastes exactly the way you would.
For the accents cool.
Huh?
For the accents cool.
What's that again?
Accents, like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And they swear consonants, so it's a lot of fun.
I will.
They all swear. Just, it's a funny, little kids are saying, just, it's hilarious. You know, the F word on every third word, little kids. And the mom, you know, the parents are with them, like, oh, yeah. All right, we're in Scotland. But everyone's really nice. And I also almost bought a 200-pound kilt. Pounds as in money.
Oh.
Not 200 pounds. And my wife brought up a very good point. And you know what the point is? You probably can guess it. Yeah, when am I ever going to wear a kilt? And I, of course, responded with, always. I'm always going to wear this kilt. She convinced me not to wear it, or not to buy it. I wish I would have bought the kilt. I would have worn it. I would have worn it on like really cold days, just to, and then open all my windows and act like I'm tough. Aren't you glad I didn't buy a kilt? It was black watch plaid. It was really cool. That was expensive. By the way, kilts come out of the Industrial Revolution. Did I tell you that story yesterday? So the traditional clothing of Scotland was a long shirt tied with a belt. Males and females, a long shirt down about here. And they might have their colors on it, but a long shirt. The problem is when they started putting textile mills because of fast-moving street in Scotland, if the shirt got caught, what's going to happen? It'll pull the whole body. So an Englishman invented the kilt. So it would just rip off. The funny thing is that would become such a big part of Scottish nationalism that eventually England would try to ban the kilt. Which is really funny. It was invented by an Englishman. So, going to Scotland. Road trip, we'll hop on the yellow school bus and take off. So, the first thing is very basic. Once you have capital, you have these machines that can do the work. Nobody understood what these machines could do. If they had proto-capitalism like the printing press or shipping or slavery, which are machines, humans. But it was never on a wide scale. And the thing is, these are really expensive, narrowing the people who could buy the machines. Remember I said about the free market, anyone could come in and sell or buy? This narrows it. It's much harder to do this. If you don't believe me, go start a car company in your basement. I'm going to make SUVs in my basement. Next, with more cost to buy the machines, more risk. You might lose. There's more cost, there's more risk. And everything gets back to risk. If you don't cut your costs, you get undermined. With more risk, that makes you even more desperate. The more you have to lose, the more fearful you are of losing it. And so this would radically change things. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad or good. It's not even a value judgment. So, let's get to a few things. If competition, therefore, just competition alone equals risk, doesn't it? So let me get back to I'm selling frozen orange juice, right? I made huge investments, make vats. How do you make frozen orange juice? I guess you put the chemicals in one side and the ice in the other side. Frozen orange juice, correct? Okay. Orange grows, I go through the whole process of making frozen concentrated orange juice. I spent a lot of money to do this. Where did I get most of this money from, by the way? Huh? Yeah, I probably borrowed it. So I got debts to pay off. Tomorrow! I'm making money, though. Now, let's say 3 more companies come in. Start selling frozen concentrated orange juice. What do I have to do? They drop their price. What do I have to do? Drop their price. What happens to my profit margin? Do you see the risk go up? Competition equals risk. If you have more to lose, you're even more fearful of competition. Now, in the market, competition is what matters. Here, no, it's terrifying. More risk, more competition. I have more to lose. Let's say, okay, I'm going to undermine you. I'll make even better frozen concentrated orange juice. I'll freeze it. And that means, but that costs more money, doesn't it? More risk. I expand, more risk. And we have a new system to pay workers. It's called the wage system. Before, workers' salary was based upon how they worked and their skill level. Now, what decides wages? To this day. I didn't hear you though. Say it again. Demand for workers, number of workers out there. The same market that decides prices decides wages. Supply and demand. Sure, there were elements of this before the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, but the most important idea of wages and what you were compensated for what you did was based upon more your own personal abilities, how much you worked, etc. The skill mattered. Only if that skill is in demand. Which, by the way, might change what you're thinking about when you go to college or go to some kind of training afterwards or what you do here. It only matters if that skill is in demand or there's not very many of them. Let's say you do have a skill, a very valuable skill, but there's a lot of people like you. What happens to your wages? It's stagnant or drops. I'll give you a really good example. Computer programming, computer science, computer coding. Oh my gosh, everyone had to get that in the 1990s and early 2000s. That job is going places all over the world. There's a glut of them all over the world. There's such a glut, it's not even funny. It doesn't mean it's not a bad job, and if you want to do it, you should look into it and do it. But don't do it because you think the wages are going to keep going up, because there's a glut. Especially if we're in a worldwide wage market. There are so many computer programmers in India that it's just mind-boggling. What does that do to wages? Stagnant or drops them. It doesn't mean it's a bad job, but be very wary of something right now. You think, oh, I'm going to do this because this skill is in demand and I'll make more money. I know it's easy to say because you have to get what job you can get, but think about something you want to do. I'll give you another example. There is a massive shortage of teachers. It's like a crisis now. It's an absolute crisis. And within 10 years, I have no idea what's going to happen. Which, by the way, tells you a lot about me. I became a teacher when there was actually a surplus. Thinking ahead. And when am I leaving? When there's going to be a shortage. Didn't time this very well. But either wages have to go up or they'll just basically get rid of education. Put you all on. And as we all know from COVID, that worked really well. Just talk to elementary school. That's actually, I'm not being facetious. That's what a lot of people say. Hey, it worked so well in COVID. Wow, go to a second grade classroom. If anybody has a parent or knows somebody who's an elementary school teacher. That's so tough. But teaching salary has to go up. Home health aides, that salary has to go up. There's a shortage that's going to be a crisis in the next 5 years. There's already a crisis in nurses. Also, not all doctors, but general practitioners, there's a crisis in general practitioners. Most lawyers, there's a glut. Doesn't mean you don't get paid more than, let's say, other jobs with a whole lot of people who can do it. But the salary is it might not be what you think. Yeah. Right now in Montana, there's a shortage. A lot of people retired early, and a lot of people have decided, even though now they're getting no money, I mean, the heck with it, I'm not going to take this awful job again. And so pay has to go up. But what's happening is, did you ever notice American Airlines just cut all their flights? Did you ever catch that? And they gave lots of reasons, storms and various things. You know what happened? They didn't want to hire any more flight attendants. And so they literally, they said, we don't have enough. But what they did is they tried to squeeze as much productivity out of them, and it just didn't work. There's a couple flights canceled. They couldn't move flight attendants around, and flight attendants, by the way, is an incredibly hard job. Wow, what a hard job. But that's what happened there. So we have an issue where companies are trying to get more productivity out of them. But Montana, the unemployment rate's really high, or really low. Unemployment really low. And but we're also coming out of a pandemic. It's important to see maybe in a year and a half, but it's going to be low. And one more thing, this hard work matters towards pay. No, it doesn't matter. Only if people who work hard are in short supply. You're someplace and work like a manager's like, well, I better give them a little bit of wage because they'll work hard at the same pay as everybody else. I mean, does anyone have a job where they like a place like, out in the regular workforce? You can have a job where you work with other people and you get paid and you're all paid the same. There's somebody who works there who does nothing and gets paid exactly. So you're that person who does nothing. Yeah, or you could be that person who does nothing, but you know you're going to get paid the same as everybody else. Yeah, hard work does not necessarily matter. Skill does not necessarily matter unless you have that skill. The wage market is pretty difficult. Do you see why workers might not have liked it? The wage market. Here's another one. If profits for the company goes up, what happens to wages? No effect. None. Wages are decided by supply and demand. Who gets the profit? Those who have the capital. They get the profit. So if they squeeze more productivity out of you, they get the profit, your wages stay. Well, whatever the market is. Right now, there's more people looking, there is maybe a shortage of workers. We'll see in a year, like I said, we still just happening. That might bring wages down. I can't believe you admit it. You're the one who just sits in back and.
Some days I wish I could do that.
When I worked, all my coworkers were like really low, and they were constantly high and they were drunk. So.
Where'd you work?
They were getting released. There was one guy on probation with an ankle monitor who would hit on me. The other guy would harass me. Yeah, so I quit.
You know the thing about that is too, and I'm not. There's no excuse.
Thank you.
See ya.
Yeah, and they were working with the 13 pills. Yeah. Not that.
Maybe not more intelligent, but more like they just give up.
Yeah. There was one guy who showed up completely wasted, yelling at everyone and taking their head on the lobby.
You know what it is? You get these people just they lose hope.
Yeah.
It's actually hysterical. Because there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing. I had a coworker who always just like taking a really long time in the bathroom, and always in the back, and I'm like trying to make like 15 bucks, and I'm like, hey, can I get some help? Like,
Oh, wow. So Blizzard, you worked at Dairy Queen?
yeah, and
Oh.
not fired, but.
But you know the thing is, how long did that person sit back in the bathroom to do that when they finally got fired?
As soon as he heard me pick up the radio, he would. That is not a compliment anyway. Yeah. Because I just knew it's not there. I wrote it in pen. Because I tried to.
Oh,
I feel like that's so bad. Yeah. Oh, I think everything was confusing. You're not asking me. Yep. The map. I would just love that for sure. It annoys you that you don't like it. Dude, people have complimented me on it, and I'm like, I like it just that way. Isn't it so cute? I'm just sitting like it, and then I just told you. I know. It's so cute. And I like it too. Where did you get it? Put on. I don't not gonna. I was totally. You did not. I made it. I have never been to good looks out of my entire life. You look and tell me I've been to so many things and I'm just never invited. Shopping downtown, like no, I wasn't there. I've never been to good looks out of Crumb ever. I've never been to Foster. Never been there. I've never been there. That's Kate and Susan or Ella. I've never been there enough. Emma, I would have remembered if I saw us at church. I would have. And I would have told you, where's that church? Your first time ever being in, I was like, you would be in the house. I've never been. Oh my gosh, I'm freezing this place.
Turn the heat again.
I'm gonna turn it back on. It's better to have some heat than no heat.
We're gonna blast.
Are you gonna speak?
Yes.
No way.
We don't want heat.
This is typical. Part E is that, and part A is that.
Thank you.
Okay.
By the way.
I just thought we don't like that. We do.
On the daily assignment, really?
Really? Yeah, I didn't know about this.
Well, I'll give you time to do it. Thank you for I tried to say, hey, Rich had this on his own separate sheet. And I thought, oh, I can put it here. He's not. But she got it, you know, as part of the bigger.
I'm so excited. It's like this.
This.
Oh, it takes about an hour. That's the.
I should have done that. So we're gonna blast heat, and then I wonder if it's gonna come back in and out every minute.
Oh, you're so long. Can we use that microwave? Can we like popcorn, for example?
What?
Can we popcorn, for example? Can we use that microwave?
Actually, it does not. It's a terrible thing for pop. It's a really cheap microwave.
Is it popcorn?
Well, no, not very well because you have to cook it for so long, it'll burn the popcorn that off early.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I wanted a very cheap microwave